The wind howled across the barren plains like a warning. Dry dust scraped against Elias Morgan's sun-wrinkled face as he stood at the edge of his dying ranch, staring at the crumbling barn his father had once built with pride. The land was exhausted. The cattle were fewer than ever. The bank had sent him another warning last week, 1 month before foreclosure. He had no wife, no heir, no hope. Elias lit a match, the flame flickering weakly as he lit his pipe. His bones ached. His soul ached. Worse. Then came the letter, a tattered envelope from a man named Reverend Blake in Kansas. It read, "I understand your situation. I have a young woman, God-fearing and strong, willing to travel west and marry. She's lost everything. If you can offer her a roof, she'll offer you a chance at life again." Elias stared at those words for hours. He wasn't a man who begged for help, but he also wasn't ready to watch this ranch, his father's grave, and every memory he held, disappear. So he wrote back, "Sender, I can't offer much, just honesty and land." 3 weeks later, she was due to arrive. He hadn't even seen her photograph. The morning train whistled like a blade slicing through silence. Elias stood stiffly at the dusty train platform of Hollow Creek, his hat in hand, heart hammering like a war drum. Then he saw her. She stepped off with quiet grace, a soft gray dress, a pale blue shawl wrapped tight against the wind. And in her hands, a large, old, weathered trunk with brass latches. Her eyes met his. Not timid, not eager. Just calm, steady, like she'd seen storms far worse than the one brewing inside him. "You're Mr. Elias Morgan?" she asked. Her voice was soft, but there was something behind it. Steel, wounds, strength. "I am," Elias replied. "And you must be Clara." She nodded once. "I don't expect comfort. I came because I need a place to belong, and I brought everything I own." She glanced at the trunk. He noticed how tightly her hand gripped the handle. Something about that trunk made his chest tighten. That night, back at the ranch, Clara didn't open her trunk. She just placed it in the corner of the guest room and closed the door. Elias lay awake for hours, listening to the wind rattle the windows, and wondering what she carried inside that box. Elias woke early, out of habit, more than purpose. Ranch hadn't seen real work in weeks. The fields were dry, the barn nearly hollow. Still, he saddled up before the sun rose, needing motion more than meaning. When he passed Clara's door, it was still closed, but her boots were lined up neatly by the wall. She was awake. He heard the soft clink of dishes from the kitchen. She was already making coffee. They didn't speak much that first morning. Clara moved like she had lived on a ranch her whole life. Hands knowing, quiet, efficient. She boiled eggs, swept the floor, and by noon had already fed the chickens. Elias watched her from the porch, both impressed and puzzled. She hadn't asked a single question. Not about the land, not about him, not even about the letter. And she hadn't opened the trunk. It still sat in the guest room's corner, as untouched as a grave. That evening, Elias tried to break the silence. "You handle yourself like someone who's seen hard years," he said, handing her a cup of coffee, as they watched the sun die behind the hills. "I've had my share," she answered, "and I'm not here to replace anything you lost. I'm just here to survive, same as you." "I didn't ask for a wife, just a partner," Elias replied. "Then we'll get along just fine." There was no flirtation, no spark, just honesty, but somehow, that felt heavier than any romance. At night, Elias couldn't sleep again. Not from discomfort, but from curiosity. The way Clara walked, the way her eyes searched the horizon, as if expecting someone to appear, and always, always, that locked trunk. He had lived alone long enough to recognize grief, but Clara carried something else. Fear. Not of him. Not of this place. But of something that might follow her. On the third night, it rained for the first time in months. Thunder rolled over the hills, shaking the windows of the old ranch house. Elias stood at the doorway, watching the downpour like it was a miracle. Even the cattle had stirred. Then a scream, short, choked, muffled. Clara. Elias rushed down the hall, heart pounding like a war drum. He pushed open her door. She sat bolt upright. In bed, eyes wide, breath caught in her throat. He saw the trunk beside her, and her hands gripping it tightly as if protecting it from something. Or someone. "Clara?" he asked carefully. She blinked as if waking from a faraway place. "I'm fine," she whispered. "It was just a dream." But Elias saw the truth in her trembling hands. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. "Whatever's in that trunk," he said quietly, "you don't have to hide it from me." She looked at him then. Really looked. Her face pale, eyes glinting with old storms. Some things ain't meant to be opened until the time is right. That night, Elias couldn't shake the image. Clara clinging to that trunk like it was life itself. He had a feeling that when the time came to open it, nothing on this ranch would ever be the same. The storm lingered into morning, soft rain, tapping at the windows like hesitant memories. Clara was already outside, hauling buckets of water toward the livestock. Mud clung to her boots, but she didn't flinch. Elias watched from under the porch roof, surprised at how steady she was. Most women, even some men, would have run from a place like this. Not Clara. Inside, as Elias poured coffee, he caught sight of something on the kitchen table, a piece of paper, torn at the edges, damp from last night's storm, not his. He picked it up, the handwriting unfamiliar but the ink still strong. It was part of a letter. The rest had been burned. Only a few words were visible. Find her. If he ever learns the truth, the trunk must stay locked. Danger to them both. Elias froze. His fingers gripped the paper harder than he realized. He glanced toward the hallway, toward her room, toward the trunk. He didn't confront her. Not yet. But something in him shifted. This wasn't just a woman escaping her past. This was a woman guarding a secret that could ruin them both, and maybe she wasn't alone in it. Later that day, Elias rode out to town for supplies. The rain had slowed to a mist, and the dirt roads turned slick under his horse's hooves. At the general store, folks greeted him with nods, half smiles, polite words, but as soon as he turned, the whispers began. He brought her in off a mail train, they say. Came with nothing but that old trunk. Might be running from the law, or worse. Even old Clara Jefferson, who'd lived through 3 husbands, and 2 shootouts, leaned over the counter and whispered, "You better know what you've brought home, Elias. A woman who sleeps with a locked box ain't just hiding linens." That night, the ranch was quiet again. Too quiet. Elias sat by the fireplace, polishing the rifle that hadn't been loaded in months. His dog, Bristle, growled softly from under the table. Not at him. At the door. Someone was out there. He stood up, heart steady, hand on the rifle. Clara came into the room without a word. She didn't ask what was wrong. She knew. They both moved to the front window. In the distance, just at the edge of the woods, a lantern flickered, someone watching, not approaching, just watching. Elias moved for the door, but Clara stopped. Him, her hand, firm on his arm. "Don't go out there." "Why the hell not?" "Because I've seen that lantern before." He turned to her, stunned. "Who is it?" She didn't answer, just looked down, and whispered, "He's not here for you." That night, Elias couldn't sleep again. But this time, neither could Clara. She sat on the edge of her bed, the trunk pulled close, fingers trembling on the lock. She didn't open it. But she placed a hand on top of it and began to pray, and in the woods, the lantern stayed lit. all night. Morning sunlight spilled through the windows, but there was no warmth in it. Elias hadn't slept. Neither had Clara. They moved like ghosts around the kitchen. He poured coffee without asking, and she sipped it silently, her eyes puffy from a long night. "You said you've seen that lantern before," Elias finally asked, voice low. She nodded. "He follows. That's what he does. Never comes closer. Just waits." "Who is he?" She hesitated. The cup trembled in her hands. "Someone I left behind. Someone who won't let go." Elias didn't push further, but inside him the storm was building. He had taken this woman in as a stranger, hoping she might heal the silence of his home. But now, she was bringing shadows with her, and the biggest one might be hiding in that damn trunk. By noon, Elias saddled his horse and rode out along the north fence line. Something felt off. Boot prints. Fresh ones. Not his. Not Clara's. Too large for her. The mud showed drag marks, like someone had been carrying weight, and headed straight toward the creek. But there was no wagon, no campfire, no trace beyond the water. Whoever it was knew how to disappear. Back. At the ranch, Clara stood in her room, staring down at the trunk. Her hands hovered over the lock. It had been years since she opened it, and she feared what would happen once she did. She knelt, breathing hard, and turned the key. Click. The lock gave way. The lid creaked open slowly, like a breath being held too long. Inside, a baby's woolen blanket, faded, torn at one corner, a silver locket, tarnished with time, and beneath those, a sealed envelope, untouched. She didn't open it, just ran her fingers over the name written on the front. Elias McGraw. Her breath caught. He wasn't supposed to see this yet. Not until she was sure. Evening fell. The dog barked again, louder this time. Clara moved to the porch, Elias behind her with rifle in hand. Across the field, just past the barn, the lantern appeared again. But this time, it moved. Toward them. Slow, steady, deliberate. Elias raised the rifle. "If he steps onto my land, I'll shoot." But Clara gripped his arm again. "No. If you do, it'll only bring more." "More what?" She looked at him, eyes glistening. "More men. More lies. More blood." Elias had seen war. He'd buried his brother, lost his father, and nearly lost himself to whiskey and the cold bite of silence. But he had never felt fear like this, because this fear didn't come from outside. It came from her. From the secret she hadn't told, from the letter she hadn't given, from the night she arrived with a smile that never reached her eyes, and a trunk that held more than clothes. Inside, Clara stood by the fire. She held the sealed letter, looked at Elias one last time, and tossed the envelope into the flames. But Elias moved fast. He plunged his hand into the fire, grabbed the burning paper, and slapped it on the hearth. Clara gasped, but he didn't flinch. "You tell me what's going on, Clara, now!" And she whispered, barely loud enough to hear, "Because if you read what's in that letter, you'll never look at me the same again." Elias stared at the letter, its edges charred, words barely visible but still alive. He didn't read it. Not yet. He looked at Clara, her face pale, hands trembling. "You were gonna let it burn. Why?" She didn't answer right away. She turned away, walking slowly to the window. Outside, the night wind blew across the fields, and the lantern's glow had disappeared. Again. "Because that letter holds a truth I never wanted to say out loud. Once it's read, there's no going back." Elias had seen men lie, seen them run from their sins. But Clara? Her voice cracked like a brittle bone. "That trunk carries my past, Elias, and maybe your future." The next morning came hard and cold. Clara kept her distance, busying herself with chores, while Elias sat at the kitchen table with the letter, He hadn't opened it yet. He watched her through the cracked window. Her silhouette moved like smoke, graceful, haunted. Finally, he opened the envelope. Inside, a single page. Handwritten. His hands trembled as he read, "To Elias McGraw, if you're reading this, then she's found you. And I beg you, protect her. Not just from the men who follow, but from what's inside her. She carries guilt heavier than steel and a truth that could break your life in two. But if you're the man I hope you are, maybe, just maybe, you can forgive her before she forgives herself." There was no name signed, only a pressed flower and a date. 3 years ago. Elias stepped outside. The wind had picked up, sky dusted with gray clouds. He walked to the barn where Clara was milking the cow, her face down, her shoulders tense. He said, "You carry guilt." She froze, didn't even breathe. "You gonna tell me what it is?" She set the milk bucket down. He? Whoever wrote that letter. Clara's eyes widened. She stood quickly. "You read it?" "I had to. You weren't supposed to." "I know." "Then why?" He stepped closer. "Because you showed up in a storm, with fear in your eyes and a locked trunk like it was guarding treasure or sin. And now men with lanterns walk my land at night." She didn't cry. Not this time, just whispered. "They're not after me, Elias. They're after what I took." "And what's that?" She looked up at him, slowly, steadily. "A child." The barn went still. Even the cows seemed to freeze. "You had a child." "Not mine. Not by blood." "Then whose?" She hesitated. A full 5 seconds passed before she said, "Your brother's." Elias took a step back. The floor beneath him didn't feel real. "My brother's dead." "I know. He died protecting us, me and the baby." "What baby?" She opened the trunk again, and from beneath the folded blankets, she pulled out a tiny, weathered baby shoe. "Your nephew." Elias didn't speak. He couldn't. The wind howled outside. The barn creaked. And his whole world, the silence he had accepted, for years, cracked wide open. He hadn't just lost his brother in the war, he had lost the truth. "Where is he now?" Elias asked. Clara lowered her head. "Safe, hidden, but for how long? I don't know. That's why I came." Outside, the dog began barking again. But this time, closer, much closer. Clara's eyes darted to the door. "Elias, grab the rifle. Get in the house." "Elias! Now!" As she ran, he stepped out into the dusk, and standing by the fence was a man in a black coat, hat low, lantern in hand, and beside him, another. They were multiplying, and Elias finally understood. This wasn't about a bride. It was about a secret war, one that had just arrived at his front gate. The man at the fence didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there, long black coat brushing the dry grass, hat shadowing most of his face. The lantern in his hand flickered like a warning. Elias raised his rifle slowly. "You lost?" Silence. Then the second man stepped forward. Thinner, twitchier. A grin spread across his dirt-streaked face. "No, sir. We're exactly where we meant to be." Elias felt it deep in his gut. These men weren't here to talk. They were hunting. "You're trespassing. You'll want to. Turn back," the thinner man laughed. "We're just looking for someone. Lady about yay tall, dark hair, real pretty. She might have passed this way, carrying something that don't belong to her." Elias didn't blink, didn't flinch. "Ain't seen her." "Shame," the thin man said, stepping closer. "We got reason to believe she's here. Mind if we take a look inside?" "I do mind." The man in the black coat finally lifted his head. His face was pale, scar down his left cheek like a knife had written its name there. "We'll be back," he said, voice low and dead. with more men, and we won't knock next time. They turned and walked into the dusk, their lanterns vanishing like dying stars. Back in the house, Clara was pale. She gripped the baby shoe tight in her hand. Who were they? They didn't give names. Elias set the rifle down but kept it close. One had a scar? She nodded. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. Clara? Who are they? She looked him straight in the eyes. Bounty hunters. But not just that. They're the kind who take what they want, sell what they find, and leave graves behind. Why are they after you? Because of who the boy's father was. My brother? She paused. A long, heavy silence. Then, with a shaky breath, yes, but there's more. She took the trunk again, pulling out an old Union officer's coat, dusty and torn. Inside the lining, hidden in a stitched pocket, was a folded paper sealed with wax. Your brother wasn't just a soldier, Elias. I know. He led a cavalry. No. He led a rebellion within one. A secret group tasked with escorting stolen Confederate gold. They were supposed to surrender it, but your brother made it disappear. Elias felt his knees buckle slightly. That's why they're chasing you? Clara nodded. He gave the map to me before he died, told me to protect the boy, and never let it fall into the wrong hands. Elias stared at the wax seal. The gold still exists? Buried, hidden, and only I know where. And you brought all this here? To me? Because you're his blood, and because I don't trust anyone else. Elias turned, walked to the fire, and threw in another log. His heart pounded like a war drum. Everything he thought he knew was dust now. A brother who'd lied, a woman with a past, and men who'd kill to find a treasure that may or may not be real. So what now? He asked. Clara stepped closer. Now, we get ready. Because when they come back, they won't just ask questions. A beat passed. They'll burn the ranch to the ground. Outside, the wind howled, and far in the darkness, a third lantern appeared, then a fourth. They weren't waiting till morning. They were already circling. Elias didn't sleep that night. He sat by the window, rifle across his lap, watching shadows move across the fields like ghosts with purpose. Clara stayed by the fire, baby Jacob in her arms, and the trunk, that cursed, precious trunk, beside her like an old wound no one dared open again. At dawn, Elias spoke. You need to show me the map. Clara hesitated, then opened the coat lining again. She handed over the folded, wax-sealed paper. He broke the seal slowly. Inside was a map so old, the edges flaked like ashes. The ink was smudged in parts, but one mark stood out, a symbol of a cross carved into the side of Deadman's Bluff, 10 miles east. I know that land, Elias muttered. It's government-owned now, fenced off. That's what your brother wanted. No one would go digging where soldiers still march. Unless they knew what lay beneath. Clara looked up. No. A knock came at the door. Sharp. Quick. 3 times. Elias spun, rifle raised. Don't shoot! It was old Gus, the trapper from across the ridge. Grizzled and half mad, but sharp as a hawk when danger neared, Elias opened the door just a crack. They're moving on ya, Gus rasped. Saw smoke signals up near Red Rock Pass. Same bunch that came through 2 winters ago. Robbin'. Settler camps. You got trouble coming, son. How many? 6, maybe 7. They ain't looking to talk neither. Elias tightened his grip. Appreciate the warning. Gus leaned close. You best bury what they want. Or bury yourself with it. Then he was gone. Clara had packed the trunk again, this time tighter, firmer. She had one hand resting on Jacob's head as he slept in the cradle Elias had built weeks ago. You still could send us away, she whispered. There's a stage. Heading north in 2 days, we could vanish. Take the map with us. Elias shook his head. You think running fixes this? They'll track you to the edge of the world, Clara. He stood tall, eyes burning. This is my land. And now, this is my fight too. By midday, Elias had rigged traps along the northern edge of the ranch, sharpened stakes in shallow pits, rattlesnake nests stirred with long sticks, and near the barn, a hidden rifle waiting in the hay. Clara helped quietly. No panic, no tears. Just calm hands and clear eyes. At one point, Elias watched her lift the baby with one hand and hammer a fence post with the other. He felt something rise in his chest. Respect, and something deeper. Something that scared him more than any outlaw ever could. He was falling for her. That evening, Clara sat beside him on the porch. "Why did you order a mail-order bride?" she asked softly. He didn't answer at first. Then, "Because I was alone, and because the land was dying without help. Figured if I had someone, maybe the place would live again." "Did you expect someone like me?" He glanced at her, then at the baby in her arms. "Didn't expect anything real, but you showed up with more truth and danger than I bargained for." She laughed, soft and tired. "Sorry about that." "Don't be," he said. "This place, it came alive the moment you stepped off that wagon." In the distance, a gunshot cracked the sky. Then another. The traps were springing. The battle had begun. And as Elias stood, rifle in hand, the wind carried a scent he hadn't smelled in years, blood and smoke. "They're here," he whispered. Clara stood beside him, silent. The trunk was locked. The map was hidden. But the truth was wide open. The sun dipped behind the mountains like a slow bleed across the sky, casting long orange shadows across Elias's land, and then, boom! A trap exploded near the north fence. Screams followed. The first outlaw had stepped right into Elias's spiked pit. Elias grabbed his rifle, shoved open the barn door, and took aim. One outlaw was limping, dragging a bloodied leg, trying to crawl out of the trap. "That's one less to worry about," Elias muttered. But they weren't done. Two shadows broke from the tree line, moving fast and low. One fired toward the cabin, bullets cracking through the porch post where Clara had stood just moments before. Inside, Clara had moved Jacob to the root cellar. She bolted the door behind her and tucked him in a wool blanket, whispering a lullaby that shook with every gunshot above. Then she climbed out, shotgun in hand. Elias was holding the barn line, crouched low behind hay bales. Clara appeared behind him. "You said to stay inside," he grunted. "And let them burn the house with Jacob inside?" She snapped, "I'm not a flower, Elias." He turned and looked at her, not just with worry, but with a flicker of pride. "Then stay low and aim true." They fought back to back. Each shot Clara fired echoed with purpose. Elias moved like a wolf, quick and brutal. 3 men down. 1 left. But the last wasn't just any outlaw. He stepped into the clearing slow and tall, untouched by traps, rifle slung casual over his shoulder like he didn't fear death. He wore a black duster and had a scar down the side of his neck that looked like it had been carved by lightning. "Hello, Clara," he called out. "You didn't think you could run forever, did you?" Elias froze. Clara's breath caught. She knew him. "Luther," she whispered. "You still got that trunk, girl?" he asked, smirking. "Or did you sell Daddy's sins to the first fool who gave you a roof?" Elias stepped forward, rifle raised. "You're done here, stranger." Luther laughed, dark and smooth. "No, rancher. I've just arrived. And you don't even know what you've brought into your home." Clara spoke then. Her voice cut through the air like a blade. "My father buried Confederate gold beneath Dead Man's Bluff, not to save it, to hide his crimes. He worked slaves to death in a hidden mine during the war," she continued, tears welling. "He hid the truth, then buried the treasure. With them, my mother found out, and he killed her." Luther clapped slowly. "And now you think exposing it redeems you?" "No," she said. But it might stop you from digging up more blood. Elias pulled the trigger. Click, empty. Luther laughed again. He stepped forward, but Clara didn't wait. She raised her shotgun and fired. Boom. Luther flew backward into the dirt, the black duster twisting like a dying shadow. Silence returned, only wind and the soft sob of a baby beneath the floor. Later that night, Elias buried the dead, all of them, even Luther. Clara knelt by the porch, trunk beside her, hands shaking. "It's over," Elias said, kneeling beside her. "No, it's just beginning," she whispered. She opened the trunk one last time. Beneath the old clothes and hidden lining was something Elias hadn't seen before. A journal, her father's, bound in red leather, every name, every burial, every stolen ounce of gold. "We take this to the marshal," she said. "We do this the right way." Elias looked at her. "You really came here to bury the past?" "No," Clara said, her voice clear now. "I came to build a future." And for the first time in years, Elias believed it might just be possible. By sunrise, Clara hadn't slept. The journal sat open on the kitchen table, its pages yellowed and cruel. Elias walked in with dirt still on his hands, boots heavy from burying the night's sins. He looked at her, the tired set of her shoulders, the firm line of her jaw, and knew something had changed in her. She wasn't just surviving now, she was choosing what kind of woman she would become. "You really want to take this to the marshal?" he asked quietly. Clara nodded. "People have the right to know what was buried along with those men." Elias hesitated. "If you do this, you'll stir up a storm." She looked up at him. "It already came, Elias, last night, and we survived it." They rode into town by noon. Clara in Elias's old coat, the journal wrapped tight in a cloth. People stared. News of the gunfire had already trickled in. Half-truths, wild rumors. Sheriff. Boone met them outside the station, rifle in hand and suspicion in his eyes. "I heard you had trouble at the ranch," he said. Elias nodded. Clara stepped forward and handed him the journal. "This is why," she said. Boone flipped the pages slowly. As he read, his face changed, from disbelief to horror to something closer to shame. "My uncle fought for the South," Boone said softly. "If he knew, this was what he was really fighting for." "It ain't about sides," Elias interrupted. "It's about truth." The sheriff nodded slowly. "I'll need to send this to the Capitol. Let them decide how to proceed. There'll be folks who won't want this known." "And folks who died wanting it told," Clara added. By evening, word had spread. Clara and Elias sat on the porch, watching townsfolk gather in small knots, whispering, arguing, staring toward the ranch like it held ghosts. "They'll come for us," Elias said. "Not all of them with guns, some with questions, some with blame." Clara looked out across the dry field, hands folded on her lap. "I'm ready." "Why now?" he asked. "Why risk everything to come here? To face it all?" She turned to him. "Because I couldn't live with the silence anymore. Because I wanted to raise Jacob where truth meant something, where my son could grow up knowing we fought for right, not ran from wrong." Elias looked at her long. "You say we like your staying?" Clara smiled. "That depends. Think you can stand the sound of a baby crying at 2 a.m.? He chuckled. "Been sleeping through coyotes and gunfire for years. I reckon I can handle one child." Later that night, Clara opened the trunk one last time. Not for gold, not for secrets, but for the faded bonnet her mother once wore. She placed it gently beside Jacob, who slept in Elias's old cradle. Then she whispered, "We're gonna be okay now, Mama, we're gonna be okay." Outside, Elias leaned against the porch rail, smoking slow, eyes scanning the dark horizon. He knew this peace wouldn't last, but for the first time in a long time, he had something to protect, someone worth fighting for. And maybe, just maybe, a family he never thought he deserved. 3 days passed since the journal was handed in. Clara stayed mostly indoors, tending to Jacob, patching clothes, and pretending the town's silence wasn't deafening. Elias worked the fields harder than ever, not because the crops needed it, but because it kept him from thinking too much. Then came the knock, not on their door, but on their fence post, a nail, a scrap of paper. Traitors don't get to raise children here. Clara found it at dawn, fluttering in the breeze like a curse. She didn't cry. She folded the note and tucked it in her apron pocket like it meant nothing, but Elias saw her hands tremble at breakfast. "It's just noise," he said, jaw clenched. "Noise turns to action when fear takes root," Clara replied softly. That evening, Clara walked into town with her head held high. She went to the general store, to the bakery, even the church, not to plead, not to defend herself, but to be seen. She knew whispers thrived where silence reigned. So she greeted folks with warmth, asked about their families, and handed Mrs. Burnley a jar of jam she'd made herself. Some turned away. Some nodded awkwardly. But one, Mrs. Tilda Grant, the blacksmith's widow, looked Clara dead in the eye and said, "My son fought in the war. I buried him with a flag. If what that journal says is true, maybe I buried a lie." Clara took her hand gently. "No, ma'am, you buried your son. And whatever he believed, he died loving his home. That matters." Tilda's eyes welled. She gave Clara a long, slow nod. Back at the ranch, Elias watched smoke rise from the hills. Someone had set fire to an aiway, old barn that once belonged to Judge Horace, one of the names in the journal. That night, Elias loaded the rifle and kept it near the front door. But Clara said nothing. Instead, she opened the trunk again. This time, she pulled out a folded map, and beneath it, a letter. "To whoever finds this, I was too much a coward to speak the truth. But my daughter, she carries my courage now. Clara, if you ever see this, I'm sorry I left so much for you to carry." It was signed in a hand she hadn't seen since she was 10. Caleb Winslow, her father. She didn't sleep that night. At dawn, she lit the stove, made coffee, and sat beside Elias on the porch as Jacob cooed in the cradle. "I think it's time we tell the town everything," she said. "Not just what was in the journal, but what was in the trunk. My father's letters. The real reason I came here." Elias looked at her, brow furrowed. "You sure? Truth like that, sometimes it don't fix things. It breaks them wider." "Then let it break, so we can rebuild honest." The wind carried the scent of coming rain, and far off over the hills, a rider watched the ranch through a spyglass. Clara had told the truth, but someone from her past wasn't ready to let her live in peace. Sunday morning. The church bell rang through the valley like a summons. Clara dressed Jacob in his only clean white shirt. Elias adjusted his collar and loaded one bullet in his coat pocket, just in case. They weren't headed to pray. They were headed to test the weight of truth. As they entered the chapel, whispers rippled through the pews. Men turned, women clutched, their children tighter. But the preacher, old Reverend Boyle, simply nodded. "Come to share something, Miss Clara?" She stepped forward slowly. Her fingers clutched a bundle of letters, yellowed and ink-blotched. At the bottom of the stack, the journal. "Some of you know me as the mail-order bride," she began. "Some of you know the rumors about what I brought with me. But few know what it cost to carry it." She opened the journal and read. One name out loud, Judge Horace Lemming. Gasps. One woman fainted. Clara continued, voice steady as stone. "My father, Caleb Winslow, was a record keeper during the war. He saw men traded for land, women buried without names, soldiers executed for telling the truth. He tried to expose it. They called him a traitor. He died in hiding, but he left me this." She held up the journal. "Not to destroy men, but to cleanse the soil our children will grow in." Tension snapped. A burly man stood, Sheriff Keaton himself. "You saying my pa was a liar?" I'm saying he was scared, Clara answered, not unkindly. Scared like mine was. Like, yours might be too. For a long moment, the sheriff stared her down. Then he walked out, silent. Others followed. But some stayed seated. Tilda Grant, Preacher Boyle, and 3 young ranchers who looked ashamed of their father's medals. Outside, Elias waited beside the wagon, watching the dust swirl. Clara stepped out holding Jacob, her face pale but proud. You did it, Elias said. No, she whispered. Now they'll decide what to do with it. That night, flames lit up the North Ridge. Someone had torched the old courthouse ruins, where most of the men listed in the journal had held court. Elias loaded the rifle again. But Clara only rocked Jacob to sleep, humming a lullaby that had no words, just memories. Far off, the rider returned. This time he dismounted. He didn't knock. He stood at the edge of the ranch until morning, waiting, watching, and in his hand was a badge, worn, rusted, and heavy with meaning. Dawn. Mist clung to the earth like it was afraid to let go. Elias stepped onto the porch, rifle slung low, jaw tight. The rider stood exactly where he had the night before, face hidden beneath a black hat, long coat still damp with dew. But this time, Clara stepped out too, holding Jacob. You waited, she said. The man finally lifted his head. Eyes, gray, like storm clouds, voice, hoarse like gravel under boots. Didn't come for you, he said. Came for the truth. He tossed the badge to the ground. It hit the wood with a dull clang. Clara's breath caught. Elias stiffened, because etched into the back of the badge were 4 letters, CWWH, Caleb Winslow's initials, her father's. Where did you get that? Clara asked, voice trembling. He gave it to me, the man said, right before he bled out in my arms. And suddenly the porch wasn't a porch. It was a war camp. It was smoke. It was pain and betrayal, and promises made in blood. The man's name was Micah Harrow, a former U.S. Marshal who had defected. Why? Because he discovered the same secrets Clara's father had, but he hadn't run. He'd gone underground, protecting the journal's existence for 15 years. I was supposed to find you when it was safe, he said. But your ad in the Gazette, you used your mother's maiden name and the town you chose. This town. It's where the final page was meant to end. Clara's legs nearly buckled. Elias caught her. Jacob reached up and touched Micah's coat, innocent. Micah flinched. He looks like him, Micah whispered. Like Caleb. The same fire. Inside the cabin, Micah placed an old, leather-bound folder on the table, unmarked, untouched for years. This is what your father died for, and what I've killed men to protect. They opened it. Inside, maps, sealed letters, signed testimonies, names of men who'd sold prisoners to gold rushers, officials who'd hung innocent settlers to steal land grants, and the final page, a confession from Judge Lemming himself, signed, dated, stamped with a seal long buried under lies. Clara stared at it all. Tears streamed down, silent and warm. Elias stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder, the other still clutching the rifle. Micah didn't sit. He just looked toward the window and said, Now you have the truth. What you do next will burn or rebuild this land. That night, the wind shifted, and in the distance, riders gathered again, this time not to threaten, but to warn. The pages of the journal lay spread across the table like raw wounds. Clara stared at them, each word burning deeper than the last. Micah stood silently, arms crossed, as Elias leaned in, piecing it all together. These names, Elias whispered. These men run this town. They own the mine, the land, even the sheriff. Micah nodded. They hung your father for digging. Too deep. Now you hold the shovel. Outside, the sun rose slowly behind gray clouds, but it didn't bring warmth. Only warning, because while they read, word had already reached the town that she had returned, and he, Micah Harrow, was back from the dead. At the general store, eyes darted. At the saloon, whispers slithered like snakes, and inside Judge Lemming's estate, a telegram sat trembling in the butler's hands. The girl's alive, the marshal too, and they have the book. Lemming's glass fell from his hand and shattered on the rug. Back at the ranch, Clara folded the final page and placed it into the trunk, the one she had carried all this way. Elias looked at her. "What are you planning?" Clara didn't flinch. "Justice," she said. "The kind that doesn't need permission." Micah loaded his revolver. "Then we start with the sheriff." The plan was quick and dangerous. That night, they'd ride into town not with guns drawn, but with truth in hand. They'd place the evidence in the saloon, right in front of the people who'd been lied to for years. Let the town decide. Let the fire spread from within. But as they mounted their horses, Clara turned to Elias. Her voice cracked only once. "If something happens to me..." Elias grabbed her hand. "Don't. You're not alone anymore." She looked down at Jacob, who stood watching from the doorway, holding a small wooden horse Elias carved for him. Clara bent, kissed his forehead. "Mama will come back." As they rode into Hollow Creek, the wind carried more than dust. It carried change, and change, as they would soon learn, is never quiet. At the saloon, the doors swung open. Gas lamps flickered. Patrons froze, cards dropped, whiskey glasses stilled midair. And Clara walked in, trunk in hand, eyes blazing. Micah followed, coat sweeping the floor, badge pinned to his chest. Elias came last, rifle ready, eyes on the corners. She slammed the trunk on the poker table, opened it. One by one, she laid out the files. The names, the maps, the letters, the confession. "This town killed my father," she said. "Now I give it back what it buried." Silence. A single cough. Then the sheriff stepped forward. "That's enough!" But before he could draw, Micah already had him in his sights. "You drew first 15 years ago," Micah growled. "Now finish the hand." The townsfolk began to rise, some with shame, others with rage, and from the back of the saloon, Judge Lemming walked in, alive, smiling. "You think the truth saves you?" he said. "I built this town on blood." Clara locked eyes with him, then let it bleed. The saloon was dead quiet. Judge Lemming stood tall, hands behind his back, calm as a vulture. Clara's fingers trembled over the files, her voice steady but heavy. "You murdered my father, and the law helped you do it." The judge's grin widened. "I didn't murder him, darling. I buried a problem." That word, buried, cut through Micah like a blade. His jaw clenched. He had been buried too, not in a grave, but in silence, in fear, in shame. Suddenly, the sheriff moved. His hand reached for his holster, but Elias was faster. Bang! The bullet hit the sheriff's gun clean, spinning it across the floor. Everyone jumped, drinks spilled. A woman screamed. "No more lies!" Elias shouted. "No more games!" Judge Lemming didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped forward. Calm, confident. "This town is mine," he said. "Do you think they'll believe you over me?" He turned to the crowd. "She's just a girl with a dead man's book, and he gestured at Micah, was always a traitor in a badge." Micah stepped forward. "Then let's give them something to believe." He pulled open his coat and dropped something on the table. His old badge. It was dented, burnt, but still shining. Beneath the bloodstains of 15 years ago, "This town hung me. This town turned its back on me." He looked around the saloon. "But this time, I won't run." Clara stood beside him now, shoulders straight, eyes fierce. "You made Hollow Creek with fear, but it's not yours anymore." Gasps. rippled through the room as townsfolk stepped forward. A few whispered Clara's father's name. A few even lowered their heads. But one man, an older ranch hand, spoke loud. I remember him. He fed my family when the mine cut us off. He was a good man, another voice joined, then another. The crowd was shifting. Lemming's face twisted. Enough! He reached into his coat, but this time Clara moved first. Crack! The wooden table split as her boot slammed into it. Files flew, Micah lunged, Elias fired, chaos erupted. In seconds, the saloon was a war zone. Gunfire, shouting, chairs flipping. Glass raining. Clara ducked behind a barrel, heart racing. Elias dragged her down. Stay low! Micah tackled the judge near the piano, fists flying. Years of rage, years of silence, all pouring out in that one brutal brawl. Lemming grabbed a bottle, smashed it, and slashed Micah's shoulder, but Micah didn't stop. Not this time. He slammed the judge against the wall. You hanged me without proof. This time, I'm the rope. Suddenly, the sheriff, wounded but crawling, pulled a gun from his boot. He aimed right at Clara. But Jacob, yes, little Jacob, rushed in. Mama! Elias turned. Bang! Everything went still. Smoke curled from Elias's rifle. The sheriff dropped, hard, and Clara caught Jacob in her arms, weeping. Outside, more townsfolk gathered, drawn by gunshots and fury. Inside, it ended with one sound. Lemming hitting the floor, unconscious. Micah stood over him, bleeding, breath heaving, but alive. The saloon was wrecked, but something had been rebuilt. Truth. Elias looked around. Now, what do we do? Clara picked up her father's journal, stained now with dust and tears. Now, we rebuild. The sun rose slow over Hollow Creek, like it wasn't sure it was welcome. Smoke curled from the broken saloon windows. Gunpowder still lingered in the air, and yet there was peace, not silence, but peace. Clara stood barefoot on the porch of what used to be the town hall. Her dress was torn, her hair wild, but her spine straight as steel. Micah leaned against the railing beside her, his arm wrapped in a torn shirt, blood seeping through. You look like hell, she said, smiling just a little. He chuckled. You should see the other guy. Below them, the townsfolk gathered, not with pitchforks, but with planks, nails, tools, ready to rebuild. Jacob clung to Clara's leg, holding the journal. He didn't understand everything, but he understood enough. His mother had fought, and the town had changed. Elias stood a little apart, his rifle slung, his jaw locked. Micah stepped down and shook his hand. You didn't have to come back. Elias nodded. Didn't mean I could stay away. Then he turned to Jacob, knelt down, and pulled something from his coat. A small, whittled horse, carved from pine. For you, for being braver than most grown men I've known. Jacob took it and smiled, eyes wide. Thank you, mister. Inside the old sheriff's office, Clara placed the badge Micah had dropped. Right back on the desk where it once sat. This time it meant something. You ever think about being the law again? She asked him. Micah hesitated. Not until now. You already are, she whispered. Outside, boards were hammered, windows replaced. Even the old church bell rang again for the first time in years. But for Clara, the real rebuilding was quieter. That night, she opened her father's journal. On the porch, she flipped to the last page. It was blank, but she wrote a single line. Justice is not just a verdict. It's what we choose to live by after the dust settles. She looked over her shoulder. Micah was sitting by the fire with Jacob, telling him stories of old Texas Rangers. Elias leaned against the doorframe, quietly watching the night. And for the first time in years, Clara felt something she hadn't in forever. Not just safety, not just pride, but home. A new family had been carved from chaos, not chosen by blood, but by truth, bravery, and the willingness to fight for what's right. As stars blinked over the hills, Clara stood and whispered to the wind, "Papa, we're okay now." Fade out. If this story moved you even a little, then do one small thing for Clara, Jacob, and for justice itself. Hit that like button, subscribe for more powerful stories like this, and tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were Clara? Because sometimes, one choice changes everything.